Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on the 17th of December. Hopefully you and your family, your community are doing well tonight. Thanks for watching. And as always, I encourage you and your community to stay up to date with your local weather situation. It's going to be getting a lot colder for many of you in the central and western interior, and eventually some of that's going to spread off to the west coast. It is certainly below normal kind of cold that we haven't dealt with so far this season. So hopefully you're prepared for that. It will grow some new ice. It's going to put some new ice in the rivers there, but it also offers up some hazards as, of course, wind chills and certainly some just bitter cold can be kind of dangerous out there if you're not ready for it. So make sure you're staying up to date on the weather. Make sure you know where your friends and your family are going. Make sure you have a plan and make sure they check in with you if you're traveling up and down the trail a little bit. 1-800-472-0391 is our Alaska Weather Information Line. It is free to you and your family anywhere in Alaska. Be sure and use that. You can also use our website, weather.gov/Alaska, or mobile.weather.gov. And I know some of you like to type in your zip code. That is one option, and in some places that might work, but it's a lot better if you type in your village name. So if you're going to type in Newtok, or even Metarvik, or perhaps Homer, that works a lot better than trying to type in the zip code that goes with your location. If you can't find what you're looking for, you can't make that site work on your mobile device, let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov, and I would be pleased to help you any way I possibly can. Let's take a look at some of the snow reports we got out of southeast. It was snowing yesterday around Hyder. They picked up 8.8 inches of new snow for Monday and into Tuesday there. Around Wrangell and just south, anywhere from 1.5 inches to 2 inches. At the airport, officially 2 inches there. Ketchikan, just 1 sloppy inch of snow. Auk Bay and Juneau had about 1/3 of an inch all the way up toward the airport, which is running around about 2 to almost 2.5 inches of snow around the forecast office, a little bit north and east of the airport there. So a little bit of new snow in southeast. Haines, you might get a little bit more tonight. For right now, though, no warnings, watches, or advisories posted in any part of southeast. A couple things going on. First of all, a wind chill advisory for the Yukon Flats and the Fort Yukon area there. The lowlands are looking at winds that will be blowing and could drive those wind chill values to about 35 to 50 below. So be extra careful out there. Make sure you're limiting outside exposure. Frostbite occurs in about 10 minutes or so in that kind of cold there. So just be extra careful, bundle up, and make sure that, again, if you're traveling, you have a plan for in case something happens and you got to spend a little extra time out there, that you have supplies and what you need in the back of the car or perhaps on the back of the sled to make sure that you're going to be okay, and make sure somebody knows that you're coming and going in case you get stuck and they can send out help. The upper end of the AKwx Valley there around Bettles looking at a wind advisory. Winds there will be blowing anywhere from the east about 30 to 45, maybe 50 miles per hour at times. So visibility could be diminished at times if you get a little bit of snow with that, but mainly it's going to be a wind issue here, and breezy in the upper AKwx. A wind chill advisory there, though, for the Fort Yukon area, and also a winter weather advisory around the central Beaufort Seacoast, around Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. We're expecting to see poor visibility at times, mainly due to blowing snow, not any new snow at this point. Winds will be blustery there as well, and because of the snow that is in the area, that could limit your visibility. Also, ceilings could be down a little bit there if that happens. For the east, though, not enough snow for a winter weather advisory, so we changed the name of it. Really, the effect is the same. It's going to be windy, but without the reduction in the visibility because there's not enough snow to blow around. So that's a high wind warning for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, as well as Kaktovik all the way out toward demarcation points. Gusts there on the order of 50 to 60 miles per hour. At times, it's going to be blustery and uncomfortably cold because of that. So wind chill advisory, winter weather advisory, wind advisory. See, now I've got all mixed up. Let's try it again. You ready? Here we go. Wind chill advisory, wind advisory, winter weather advisory, high wind warning. Good times. Cold too. High pressure sitting across the Yukon Valley right now is slowly creeping westward just a little bit. This entire area, though, is really under the control of that high pressure system, and that's because we've got a big low sitting out here across the Gulf, and it's not moving because the high pressure system's not moving, and because there's nothing else coming at us from the west that's really going to kick this stuff into gear. So what are we stuck with? We have a low pressure system dragging in moisture into southeast, and that's where we're finding our rain and our mushy snow that's been falling in places like Hyder again with a very wet, sloppy stuff. And really a ragged area of low pressure here all the way out towards Sand Point. It's also dragging in some cloud cover across the western Bering Sea, but primarily it's right on the boundary from kind of a little bit of a ridge of high pressure here, and the really cold, dry air that's been spilling off the continent right now. So you can see this wave just kind of buckling right here south of Sandpoint and south of Kodiak. Now, as this nudges a little bit further north, we're going to see this play out time and time again, it looks like, for the next several days. Little disturbances will work their way from east to west, and as those pass through, we'll probably see more clouds around southwest, south central, and probably a better chance of precipitation across southeast. But nothing really significant at this point. There will be some higher terrain snow opportunities around the Kenai Peninsula, maybe the Talkeetnas, that might be a little bit too far north. And when these pass over across the interior, it's going to stir up the wind a little bit each time. But other than that, really not what we would call an active weather situation. It's just cold and dry, and it's our darkest week of the year as we head into the solstice week itself. Today's weather map shows that low pressure system sitting at 967 millibars. With this, though, we do expect to see some new ice growth across the west. The challenge will be how much wind do we get with this and how fast does that ice grow. That will all be new ice and young ice after that. But beyond that, it does look like we'll see some pockets of rainfall across the Alaska Peninsula into the northern parts of the Gulf, and a little bit of light rains falling across the central parts of the Panhandle this afternoon. The crossed arrows, of course, mean reduction in visibility due to blowing snow, and that is going to be a trend we see across the Beaufort Seacoast into the Alcan border. Periods of clouds will be possible, but primarily they're not going to be terribly thick, certainly not precipitation producing, except in southeast. And in southeast, we have some areas of light rain tonight, maybe some mixed with snow across the northern half if we see anything like that at all. Hyder probably starts to pick up a couple inches of snow as we get into the late night hours and early morning tomorrow. Winds are picking up across the northern Gulf. As this front is squeezing into the coastline, we're going to get that barrier jet that I like to talk about a lot, kind of a really quick little area of wind that builds right up against the coast because that pressure gradient is getting squeezed right against the northern coast and the mountains. South of that, south of Homer and outside of Kachemak Bay, maybe a mix of rain and snow, and some of that could be just around St. Paul and St. George, otherwise rain showers for the Aleutians. You can see how these lines just wrap around that area of low pressure, that entire area really under control of the weather out in the Gulf. Wednesday, again, the crossed arrows move into the central Yukon. Wind will be an issue there. That's where we have that wind advisory right now. Pockets of snow for the Yukon, and again, that broken trough sitting across the north and eastern Gulf means it's falling apart. So you'll see that kind of disintegrate and change a little bit as we go into the next couple maps. Pockets of clouds, maybe some blowing snow reducing visibility in the north. And here's our next weather system, a 985 millibar low working its way into the western Bering, and it wants to move in. But high pressure here across the northern Yukon and the Beaufort sitting at 1,025 millibars. That is some cold, cold air. And so far, it looks like the coldest of the season. Out across the west, that ridge of high pressure extends all the way across the YK Delta and into the chain. And so this weather system has got to break through that if it's going to go anywhere. It'll probably start to weaken as we get into Friday and Saturday, and it looks like the cold will win because that's the time of the season we're in. A 977 millibar low sits across the central and southern parts of the Gulf. That's still bringing in some wet air across southeast. We'll still get some chances of rain and snow in the Panhandle, nothing too significant. Mixed precipitation here working its way into the northern Gulf, but primarily we're going to watch for the wind, I think, across some parts of the mountain passes for sure, north of Haines and the Klondike Highway into the Chilkoot Pass region, probably looking at least some snow and probably more wind. Let's take a look at the temperatures. Really, that's the big impact, I think, for the next couple days. Overnight lows 25 to 30 below across the Yukon Flats, 6 below for Utqiagvik. Bethel, you're looking at about 3 above. Southwest, teens and 20s, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, 20s and 30s for the Gulf Coast communities. Fairbanks, 7 below for a high temperature tomorrow, 23 below for Arctic Village, anywhere from 5 to 10 below for the North Slope, 14 above in Nome, 4 above for Bethel. Bristol Bay, you're looking at temps in the mid-20s to almost 30, 33 in St. Paul. Southeast, 30s and 40s there. Sitka looking at 42, Anchorage 26. Overnight lows again get even colder Thursday morning, down to about 40 to 45 below for the Yukon Flats, 30 below for Eagle, 5 to 15 below for the North Slope. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, some of the coldest, 30s and 40s for Southeast, 33 in Kodiak, and 33 in Adak. High temperatures on Thursday, only 33 below in Fort Yukon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And back with a look at your aviation forecast now. We'll see widespread MVFR from St. Matthew all the way down to the central Aleutians and kind of hit and miss around the eastern end of the eastern chain and into the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Places like St. Paul and St. George probably looking at least a marginal start Wednesday morning, but most of the west coast, certainly our hubs into Bethel and into parts of Southwest looking pretty good. The Alaska range looking fairly good. Generally VFR across the Yukon Valley all the way through the Brooks Range, and then we get back into some blowing snow and some low decks that could limit visibility there around the North Slope all the way into the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Southeast looking at marginal conditions in the morning. Hit and miss IFR generally north of Gustavus and into parts of the Lynn Canal, and then we'll see widespread IFR right along those fast-moving winds stretching into Kodiak City and perhaps out toward Raspberry Island and the northern end of the Gulf Coast. Parts of Prince William Sound marginal as well. As we get into the afternoon, that area should shrink, but it's also going to move north a little bit, so closer to Montague Island, Hitchenbrook entrance, all the way out toward Kodiak. Looks like that'll probably go down, and then south and west toward the Shumagins, marginal, maybe IFR developing in the region. More widespread marginal conditions across the central Bering and the North Slope, and then marginal at least through southeast. Some of the higher terrain from Hyder north and east of Petersburg looking at IFR concerns. Through Thursday afternoon, marginal conditions overtake most of the Gulf. You'll see IFR just east of Kodiak. Marginal conditions along the Alcan border stretching into parts near Valdez and McCarthy across the Alaska Range, especially just north toward Denali and eastern areas toward Healy. The Beaufort Seacoast looking at marginal conditions. And the higher terrain around southeast certainly looking at IFR. And we'll see the next band working in across the western chain, mostly out over the open water. That'll push eastward into the afternoon for Adak and maybe to Atka by late in the day. Areas ahead of that, though, St. Paul and St. George should be okay. VFR conditions across most of Southwest, the West Coast, Norton Sound, and Kotzebue Sound. The eastern Beaufort Seacoast at least looking at marginal weather, as well as a large part of the Gulf and at least southern parts of Southeast, as well as the higher terrain and McCarthy, Northway, maybe up to Eagle, looking at MVFR by the afternoon. Here's your pass conditions in detail for your Wednesday. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass look A-OK. VFR conditions there. Cold in Lake Clark and Merrill, but VFR it looks like through Rainy and Isabel Pass and Windy Pass. It looks like we'll continue to see VFR through Mentasta Pass. Tanita Pass looking pretty good. Portage Pass, MVFR, mainly on the eastern side again. As you get through, if you can get through the pass, it'll be VFR on the other side. And Chilkoot and White Pass looking to be marginal there with IFR concerns developing later in the day. Surface freezing lines, no question about it. Colder weather is pushing in and from the north, and you'll notice that surface freezing line taking a jog south of Cape Newenham all the way out toward the Shelikof Strait region, Kenai Peninsula, and wrapping into the higher terrain of southeast. Elevated lines anywhere from 2,000 feet across southwest, and then we get into the bulk of the warmer weather that's out across the Gulf right now. Levels as high as 2,000 to 4,000 feet there, sitting right around 2,000 feet from Gustavus to just south of Sitka, all the way out toward Ketchikan and Annette. Icing potential is somewhat limited. Isolated moderate right now is the risk for a large part of the Gulf Coast communities from the Kenai Peninsula all the way to southwest and over southeast. Levels there range from about 4,000 to 5,000 feet and above. A little bit out to the west, you see levels around 3,000 feet and above for St. Paul and St. George all the way down to the Aleutians. Our jet stream right now has a large and pronounced trough of low pressure sitting across the Gulf. Wind speeds there running really fast, 110 to 130 knots, and slamming the active weather into parts of the Pacific Northwest. Cold air is being funneled in from a stronger push from the north, 55 to 65 knots coming in from the north and west over western Alaska right now. And the active storm pattern pushed a little bit out to the west, out across the western Bering Sea with speeds there around 60 to 100 knots. At 9,000 feet, you can see our trough of low pressure sitting across the Gulf, and that gives us a southerly flow into a large part of southeastern Alaska. But those northerlies are driving in the cold, and those wind speeds right now at 9,000 feet running between about 10 and 25 knots, generally from the north and northeast through most of the interior. A little bit of a ridge out here across the western Bering. On the other side of that, of course, is our next round of more active weather, 60 to 65 knots there. Wind speeds as strong as 75 knots as you get closer to Shemya at 3,000 feet. North and easterly winds wrapping in through the interior here at 3,000 feet, 20 to 40 knots. Low pressure sitting right across the central Gulf, and southerlies coming into southeast, and that southeasterly flow bringing in more cold continental air from Canada into the interior. So turbulence is our concern, mainly across the coastal areas, considerable moderate, fairly widespread across the central and eastern chain on the south side of the Alaska Range, Kodiak Island all the way to the outside of Prince William Sound, and parts of the southern outer coast of southeastern Alaska, all below about 4,000 feet, and a little bit of chop up across the North Slope and into communities just south of Arctic Village and Fort Yukon.
On March 11, 2011, a powerful tsunami hit Japan, destroying cities and villages. As the water receded back into the ocean, it pulled what remained of buildings, cars, boats, and homes along with it. Scrap metals, plastics, and objects of all shapes and sizes either sank near the shore or floated away. In the days that followed, large masses of floating debris could easily be seen by satellite imagery and aerial photos. In the wake of this disaster, NOAA is assessing the potential impact that the debris may have on U.S. shores. So, where will this debris go, and when will it get there? To help answer those questions, scientists are using computer models to estimate the debris' path, using its starting location in the tsunami zone and historical weather and ocean conditions. The findings are that some debris could pass near or wash ashore in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands as early as this winter. Debris may also approach the west coast of the United States in 2013 and potentially circle back to the main Hawaiian Islands in 2014. But scientists caution that there are limitations to what computer models can tell us, now that the debris has moved out of satellite view, and with currents and winds in the Pacific constantly changing, there is no guarantee that the debris will stay on the predicted path. Items will sink along the way, or break up and disperse in many directions. Despite these unknowns, NOAA and its partners are collecting data, assessing possible impacts, and making preparations in case debris does wash ashore. The 2011 tsunami in Japan reminds us that the devastation that happens on land can also become a marine debris issue at sea.
Imagine all of this underwater. In a major tsunami, it could happen. In this part of Washington state, it's happened before, hundreds of years ago. Sometime in the future, it will likely happen again. But we can be ready. If a tsunami strikes, this school will provide a place for people to ride it out above the waves.
We're in Westport, Washington, and right behind me is the very first tsunami vertical evacuation center in the United States.
This is an emergency. Please walk to the nearest exit. Go to the stairs tower and proceed up the stairs.
Tsunamis are a potential hazard for low-lying coastal areas. That's why many coastal communities have plans in place to get people to safety, high ground or inland, where they can be beyond the reach of a tsunami. Often there are signs showing where to go and where to gather. Most tsunamis are caused by underwater earthquakes along subduction zones, where two of Earth's plates collide and one is forced under the other. Westport and other Pacific Northwest coastal communities are especially at risk because one of these zones lies just offshore. It's called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. An earthquake here caused a tsunami in 1700 that flooded shores as far away as Japan. Experts say it's just a matter of time before it happens again. Since the subduction zone is so close, a tsunami like the one in 1700 could strike before people in some low-lying areas could get to high ground or inland. And Westport doesn't have a lot of high ground or easy routes inland.
If we get an earthquake or a tsunami, we're going to get a lot of water in the area really quickly, and we needed a place to go. So our community built this brand new school, and above our gym and cafeteria, we have a roof, and so the idea is that we'll get all of our students up, and anybody from the community who needs to get up, they can get up there as well.
Ocosta Elementary School might seem like a normal school, but look more closely. It's engineered to withstand monster waves. Tsunami vertical evacuation shelters must be able to resist the powerful forces that a tsunami brings. Hydrodynamic, buoyant, hydrostatic, and debris impact forces and strong currents. They're also designed to help people get to safety quickly.
There are 4 big staircases on each corner of the building, and each one of those staircases is 8 feet wide, and we can get the whole school evacuated in about 4.5 minutes.
Everybody should be at a 0.
On the roof of the building, there is water and food and buckets and shelters and tarps and blankets and different things so that we can be up there for 2, 3, maybe 4 days while we wait for rescue.
You can go to the top and you know you'll be safe. It feels really nice to have a special building because you feel protected.
This community decided that a tsunami evacuation center was important because they didn't have anywhere to go, and they decided to use their money to build the building. The additional cost is anywhere between 10 and 20% of the actual building cost itself, and that's really a sound investment for a lot of protection. You may be there a while, but you're safe and you're secure, and that's the most important thing.
And now, marine weather around Alaska. And under marine update now, with ice continuing to build in across the Chukchi coast, out of Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, we're seeing some polynyas develop here in the lee side of the coast as we're getting some stronger winds pushing off the coast from time to time. That'll pull some of the older ice away. Of course, all of that's relative. This is all new ice for the season, but more areas will be filling in, and we're going to see more ice on the move as we get into the next couple days, I think, as we get into stronger offshore push feeding into the next weather system here and blowing out of high pressure across the continent. So watch for changes. This is the latest update today from our friends at the Alaska Sea Ice Program, weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and lips just getting cold thinking about it, I guess. Northwesterlies across the Lynn Canal as we get into Wednesday. Stronger gusts moving across Stevens Passage could bring winds up to 35 knots there. 4-foot seas expected, 6-foot seas around Clarence Strait. And all of this blowing in ahead of a front that's just offshore. 35 knots up north, 25 knots down south, still looking at about 13-foot seas along the coast. Just a little bit of a change as we get into Thursday as that front is cutting in. Easterlies pick up across Cross Sound and Icy Cape to Cape Fairweather and just outside of Cordova. South and easterlies continue south of Sitka and Port Alexander all the way down to the Dixon entrance. 18-foot seas there with 25 knots out of the southeast. Still looking at gusts from the east around Stevens Passage up to 35 knots. Northwesterlies continue in the Lynn Canal and 25 knots across Clarence Strait up to 8-foot seas there on Thursday. For South Central, 25 knots from northeast. Looks like 5-foot seas there. 25 to 35 coming down Cook Inlet, the strongest after you get past Kachemak Bay. Easterlies blowing into the Barrens at 10 knots, otherwise 12 to 13-foot seas across the northern Gulf waters. As we get into Thursday, that diminishes somewhat. Still looking at about 15 to 30 across Cook Inlet with the highest seas and winds as you head south of Homer. North and easterlies across the northern Gulf. And winds inside of Prince William Sound diminish, 15 knots and 2-foot seas there on Thursday. For Bristol Bay, northerlies 25 knots, 5-foot seas. Looking for similar conditions, just a little bit higher seas though as you head down the coast. 30 knots there inside of Shelikof Strait with a 12-foot sea. North and easterlies down the northwestern Gulf. Anywhere from 13 to 18-foot seas there on that 25-knot wind. So we get into Thursday, winds diminish a little bit. We're still looking for higher seas to build in though as we get north of Cold Bay and Sand Point. 11-foot seas there down the Bering Sea coast. North and westerlies from Shelikof Strait all the way down to Kodiak Island and Sand Point. 25 to 30 with 11 to 12-foot seas in the region for Thursday. For the Aleutians, the highest winds and seas will be here across the central chain. A stronger southerly flow is developing out west, though, in advance of that next weather system we were talking about. 25 and 35 knots around the central and eastern chain, though, with 11 to 15-foot seas on Wednesday. That diminishes a little bit on Thursday, but you can see the result out west that allows for room to build in from the west and southwest with 35 knots and 17 to 19 footers as we get into your Thursday afternoon. For Wednesday, across the west coast, again, that north and easterly flow coming down the coast is going to help to build more ice, but it may actually pull some of that ice away from the coast a little bit too. 15 to 25 in the region, looking for 7-foot seas around St. Matthew, 9-foot seas around the Pribilof water, 6-foot seas inside of the Kuskokwim Delta region, all in that 25-knot wind. Winds start to change a little bit around St. Matthew, still looking for a southerly wind around the region, 30 knots with 14-foot seas. Westerlies for St. Paul and St. George with 8-footers there. And still holding onto that offshore flow around Norton Sound down through Etoll and Strait, and northerlies there in the Kuskokwim Delta continue 30 knots and 8-foot seas on Thursday. For the Beaufort Seacoast, winds are going to be strong. Again, a high wind warning continues for the Kaktovik area in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Winter weather advisories for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse thanks to the blowing snow, but gusts may be strong there. 35, 40 miles per hour may be possible, 20 to 25 over the coastal areas, and 10 to 25 knot winds there across the Chukchi coast. A little bit of a lull there around the Kotzebue Sound region. Winds shift to the south and east on Thursday. Light northwesterly winds for the central and western Beaufort Seacoast, and northwesterly stay strong up to 20 knots around Kaktovik, and we'll keep an offshore wind blowing for the Chukchi coast. So a lot of wind for the north, a lot of cold for the interior. And once again, a wind chill advisory is posted for the Fort Yukon area and the Yukon Flats tonight, looking for wind chill values as cold as 50 below. That means frostbite danger could happen as quickly as 10 minutes or so make sure you're limiting outdoor exposure. Be prepared for the cold. If you're traveling on the sled or the car, make sure that you've got some backup plans in case the travel plans don't work out just right. Make sure you let people know when you're coming and going. Out across the middle Yukon Valley, blowing snow may be possible. The main effects for precipitation, though, mainly across southeast tonight. Rain in the northern half, might be a little bit of a rain mixed with snow set up. Most areas are not going to see a whole lot of precipitation, showery at best across the north and western Gulf Coast. High pressure is going to continue pushing cold into the interior. It gets even colder as we head into Thursday with temps running around 30 to 35 below.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.